It just says when the meetings start, we'll let people know you're waiting. I'm stuck out here in the.
Okay, do you see the one I just sent you? Oh,
Let me look. Town hall moderator chat. Let me try that one.
And just to let you know, Jason just went live on YouTube and I'm about to go live on Facebook.
Okay, this looks a little different, so let's see if this works. Join now. I'm still back at the letting people know I'm there. I'm on the outside looking in.
we're gonna need to, yeah.
Let me try. I see another link that you just sent me, so I'll try that one again. Let's see. It says meeting now. Join as a guest. Same thing.
Yay, there you are.
You see me?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't see any. Oh, I don't.
You're
Oh, no,
coming.
okay, now there we go. Okay. Whew. Oh boy.
Okay.
Also, it's starting in 4 minutes, it looks like.
You can turn your camera off because we're just gonna chat in this.
Okay, we're gonna turn my camera off and the chat.
And mute it.
Okay.
And then just make sure your chat's open.
Okay, there we go.
Boom.
All right. Here's the thing. You have my cell number too.
Recording in progress.
Okay, we're recording and live on Facebook and YouTube.
Okay, well, we've got 3 minutes to go before we officially start our town hall meeting. We'll be focusing on diversity and inclusion. 3 minutes to go before we officially start our town hall meeting. We'll be focusing on diversity. I think I'm hearing a little echo.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't hear it that time. I'll try that again. Take 2. Welcome to the City of Auburn Town Hall. We are here to talk about a very important topic, diversity, with a great panel of speakers who I will be interviewing. I'm Kevin Henry. I'll be the facilitator, and I'm looking forward to a lively and informative discussion with our panelists. So we'll get started in about, let's say, 3 or 4 minutes. I did get a message in our chat that Pastor Lambert was, well, he's not there anymore, but he's trying to get back in. So I wasn't sure if you saw that. It'll be so nice when we can do these things in person, won't it? Looks like Pastor Lambert is back with us. There he is. Okay, we'll get started in about 2 minutes. Give everybody a chance to sit down, get comfortable, have some hot tea in front of their laptop. Isn't that cozy?
That does sound cozy.
If you have a fireplace, you know, put the logs on the fire, get all comfy. I don't have a fireplace, so I just have to turn the heat on.
Oh, well, that's fine.
I have heat. I should be happy about that.
Exactly. Can use your oven.
Well, it's an electric oven. I definitely shouldn't use it if it were a gas oven, that's for sure.
Oh, well, yeah, it's probably good advice.
That could be problematic. Okay, well, it's 6 o'clock and I can kind of slowly ease into the introductions here and get started. We'll be here for the next couple of hours at least. This is a City of Auburn Town Hall, and I'm the facilitator for the evening, Kevin Henry. I had the honor and the privilege of doing one of these before, and I'm happy that I was invited back. This is a very, very important topic we're going to talk about tonight, diversity and inclusion, equity issues, how the City of Auburn is rising to the occasion to engage the community and address issues, work together to promote understanding between community members and different diverse communities within the City of Auburn. And if anything, I know it's been a very turbulent and unsettling a couple of years with COVID and the George Floyd case and protests. And however, it's the silver lining, I think, is that it's revealing to us that there are issues that maybe we weren't paying attention to, or maybe we just weren't aware of how severe things were. But so I look at this as an opportunity to address the issues. And this is why we're here tonight. And this is just the beginning of what should just be an ongoing dialogue about these important topics. I will introduce the panelists in just a second, but I wanted to introduce Hillary Pittenger, who will do a land acknowledgement, and then we will have some words from Mayor Backus, and then we'll move on through our agenda. So, Hillary, it's all yours.
Good evening. Before we start, I just want to acknowledge that all of us here in Auburn are standing on the ancestral and contemporary homelands of the descendants of those who became the Muckleshoot Indian tribe. They are the original caretakers of this land, and they have called it home since time immemorial.
Thank you, Hillary. And now I'd like to introduce the mayor of the City of Auburn, Mayor Nancy Backus.
Thank you, Kevin. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background on how we got to this point tonight for this town hall. Back in 2018, there was a conference up at Green River College called the Governing for Racial Equity and Inclusion Conference, or GREI. And it was up at Green River, and many of the Sound Cities Association cities, which are all the cities in King County outside of Seattle, were there. And we had a breakout session, excuse me, and everyone in the room was challenged to have a goal of what they were going to do to advance equity, diversity, so the DEI in our own cities. And some of the electeds would say, well, I'll take it back and we'll talk about it with our council. And I decided that just wasn't good enough. If I didn't have a solid goal that day of how we were going to advance DEI work in our city, then it just wasn't going to be the right thing to do. And so I committed that very day in that room to working with a consultant to begin our DEI journey within the City of Auburn. And I'm really proud of the work that we have done so far. We hired our first consultant. All of our directors and I went through 48 hours of training with the consultant. Our city council members went through almost 40 hours. And during that time, I will say that I had the brilliant idea to hire Brenda Goodson Moore as our DEI manager. And she has just taken this to the next level already. We are working with a new consulting firm, DeMarsh, and you will hear from them. And Brenda has been doing so much work in our community, so many different conferences and learning opportunities for her that she's sharing with all of us. And we just really look forward to where we are going to be moving forward. We are in our infancy in this work, but I am really proud of the buy-in, the dedication that our leadership team has. And I think you'll hear some of that tonight. Again, we're in our infancy, but we've started, and I'm really proud of that work.
Thank you very much, Mayor Backus. Now I'd like to move on to the aforementioned Brenda Goodson Moore, who will talk about the current status of the DEI program at the City of Auburn.
Thank you, Kevin. I also did want to tell the audience that you can use the question and answer at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. And if you want to ask questions on Facebook or YouTube, please feel free to put them there and we'll get them. So I just want to provide an overview of the diversity, equity, and inclusion program that we're doing here at the City of Auburn. And so we'll start off by talking a little bit about the Inclusive Auburn initiative. The Auburn City Council adopted Resolution 5427, otherwise known as the Inclusive Auburn Initiative, to eliminate systemic causes of disparities, racial and otherwise, in the City of Auburn, to promote inclusion and create opportunities for full participation for every resident and business in the City of Auburn, and to reduce and eventually eliminate disparities of outcomes in our community. Resolution 5427 authorized the mayor to enter into a contract with Racing to Equity Consulting to provide diversity and inclusion training and policy development, including the development of an organizational assessment, which was needed to identify gaps and to set metrics for monitoring the progress of the city's work. This initial work, as the mayor mentioned, started with 48 hours of leadership training for the mayor and directors and provided staff engagement about the plan for initiating a diversity, equity, and inclusion program throughout the city. In 2020, the Auburn community and city staff completed surveys, and some staff participated in a focus group to provide data and feedback on their experience working at the City of Auburn. This information was used to develop our organizational assessment. Our city council also attended 40 hours of governing for racial equity training as well. And then the city also hired a program manager to manage the city's work plan. Now, the city's contract with Racing to Equity expired in December of 2020. We put out a new RFP for a consultant to assist us in completing the first and second phases of the work identified in our roadmap. After receiving 7 proposals and participating in a formal review and interview process, DeMarsh Consulting was selected to assist us in completing training and other critical components of our framework. In 2021, the city's DEI work has primarily been focused within human resources, as well as updating and revising our work plan with the new consultants. We are actively advocating for DEI efforts and building a framework for creating and maintaining accountability for an inclusive workforce. In our human resources department, we started a deep analysis of our hiring and retention processes and policies. We have been working quite a bit in this area and focusing on recruiting, interviewing, and developing policy around implicit bias training and diverse interview panels. And in line with the belonging factor of diversity, equity, inclusion, the retention of our most valuable asset, our employees. We are in the process of building our first internal employee resource advisory group. This committee will be an internal employee-led work group for fostering an inclusive, diverse workplace who will make recommendations to existing policies and procedures within the organization to promote institutional change within the organization to better serve our community. In partnership with our consultants, we recently completed leadership readiness assessments, and after an extensive review of our organizational assessment, we will begin working with each department within the city to deliver culturally competent trainings tailored to each individual department to embed and infuse equity throughout our organization. And I'll let our consultants tell you a little bit more about that. And so our future goals as we move into 2022, 2023 are going to be to ensure that the city has a strategic plan with a racial equity component in place for 2022 and 2023. The City of Auburn's racial equity team has a workable and achievable plan of action and implements it in partnership across organizational sectors, and that we ensure that the City of Auburn has the tools to measure its progress to achieving racial equity regularly and over time, including an equity index. The completion of the City of Auburn's racial equity policy and equity tool development, research, analysis, and metric development. We will also ensure the development of the City of Auburn's racial affinity caucusing and employee resource groups. Well, we will also be working on the development of an external DEI advisory board, who will review and approve a DEI vision statement, mission statement, and strategy for the city created by our internal employee-led resource advisory group. They will assist us with setting priorities, goals, and timelines for DEI work in consultation with city leadership. They will advise city leadership on outreach strategies to recruit, retain, and engage with marginalized communities. They're also going to make recommendations on current or new plans for promoting DEI and ensure that the perspectives and the needs of marginalized community members are heard and addressed. And I just want to say, the City of Auburn is a place where all people should feel welcome and safe. This is an inclusive community, and we have zero tolerance for hate and racism. Advancing inclusion and belonging for people of all races, national origins, ethnicities, genders, age, sexual preference, and religion is critical to guaranteeing the safety and security of our community. And I'll turn it back to you now, Kevin.
Wow. Okay.
That was a mouthful, huh?
That is a very strong commitment to as they say, the long haul. This isn't a short-term fix.
Right.
Definitely not a check the box kind of situation. It's and I was particularly impressed with just how deeply the city has dove into really understanding the history of the organization, what's been going on and what's happening right now. And speaking of history, I always like to say we don't know where we're going unless we know where we've come from. So I wanted to bring up Hillary Pittenger to talk a little bit about the history of Auburn as it pertains, especially as it pertains to race and social justice. So it's all yours, Hillary.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. I have some slides with some historic images. There we go. All right, well, good evening, everyone. I am Hillary Pittenger. I am the Curator of Collections here at the White River Valley Museum in Auburn, which is a part of our Parks Department. And I am going tonight to just do a very brief history of the many different groups of people who have made Auburn their home and how our past has shaped our present a little bit. And hopefully we'll get into that a little later. So first of all, we're going to talk about prior to the 1830s. The only residents of the valley before then were the Coast Salish people, who are the ancestors of the present day Muckleshoot Indian tribe. These folks came from the Duwamish, Skokomish, Skolkomish, Stutkomish, Tuaquamish, Yalkoamish, and Snoqualmie tribes. They lived along rivers, so especially river valleys, because rivers were our primary transportation routes, and rivers were the source of their identity. All of these different bands lived in different river watersheds. Here is an image of a canoe that is in display in our exhibit on Muckleshoot history, as well as some images behind of the river being used for transportation and fishing. Before being forced onto reservations, Coast Salish people in our area were semi-nomadic, which meant that they rotated into different traditional places that they resided in throughout the year with different seasons, either for food gathering or for different cultural practices. This is a model of a winter house, which would have been very similar to the kind that would have once stood in the village of Ilaglo, which was close to the intersection of modern day East Main and R Street in Auburn today. The first non-Indigenous people in the area were British fur traders and their hired laborers, which they brought with them from many different ethnic backgrounds, including Hawaiian and East Asian folks. Mostly they were based out of Steilacoom and Nisqually. But the first settler colonists who came to stay in the White River Valley area came in the 1850s. These were usually white Americans from eastern states, including Tennessee, Wisconsin, New York, and Illinois. They had a variety of Western European backgrounds, primarily for the very first residents, Irish, Dutch, and English. This cabin that is on display in the museum was built actually by immigrants of Finnish descent who settled on the East Hill of Kent. these white settlers came because of the Donation Land Act, which was a US government law that gave land to settlers in order to force indigenous folks off of the land and also to encourage the commercial use of the land and natural resources. Conflict over the Donation Land Act would eventually lead to the Puget Sound Treaty War, which was partially fought right here in our valley. There were also early anti-Black laws that started when we were still part of Oregon Territory, which actually prohibited both enslaved and free Black people from settling in the entirety of Oregon Territory. So unfortunately, even though those laws were repealed when we became Washington Territory, they still had a real negative impact on Black folks wanting to move here. A lot of settlers came here to do agriculture. Here is an image of some hops farmers. Hops was our first big cash crop here in the valley. And here you can see a local white family on the right. You can see them in their darker, fancier clothes, along with their hired white and Native American laborers. As Native Americans were forced out of their traditional life paths and life ways, they often became seasonal laborers in agricultural works, including the hops harvest here in Auburn. The Donation Land Act actually changed our whole region and divided it into a giant checkerboard. Prior to this division, during the time of setting up treaties with all the different tribes in the Northwest, the Muckleshoot tribe was promised land and access to resources under two different treaties, the Treaty of Point Elliott and the Treaty of Medicine Creek. The orange line is a very rough and conservative estimate of some of the initial area that was first promised to them. It was supposed to be a wedge that came from around downtown Auburn, contained both the White and Green River valleys, and went all the way towards Mount Rainier. Unfortunately, the paperwork for the reservation's establishment was delayed due to the impeachment of President Andrew Johnson. And by the time it was signed, all that land had been divided into a checkerboard and mostly given away to either commercial interests or to white settlers. So only the land in the purple squares was eventually designated for the reservation, which is partly why it has such an unusual shape of these non-contiguous squares even today. Other government policies would continue to seek to harm and eradicate indigenous people, including allotment, which would further take away land from the reservation, and forcing Native children into Indian boarding schools, which took them away from their families and purposely caused them to lose their culture and their language. Starting in the 1880s, we had waves of immigrants from all over the world that came into the valley. One of our largest populations was actually Japanese folks, primarily from the Hiroshima area. They actually called this jokingly Hiroshima Prefecture because so many folks from that area immigrated to settle here, especially in North Auburn. We also had a lot of Scandinavian immigrants, which we interpret and talk about the history of them on our Mary Olson farm here in Auburn. We also had a lot of Greek and Italian immigrants that came along with the building of the railroads, which started in the 1880s around here. Unfortunately, alien land laws were passed that prevented East Asian immigrants specifically from purchasing and owning land in our area. So even though all these different immigrant groups might have come here to do agricultural work, the Scandinavian immigrants would have had a definite leg up in terms of being able to sell their own produce and own their own land, while the Asian families mostly had to lease from white farmers. We had mentioned that there weren't too many Black residents of the area, but there were some that we have documented evidence of. And in fact, the very first Juneteenth in all of Washington state was celebrated right here in Kent. So folks were still finding ways to celebrate and enjoy life. This Buddhist home altar that we have on display at the museum actually tells a really emotional story about Japanese immigration to this area. It was brought to the area around the turn of the century, and it would have been, aside from just a really treasured religious artifact, it also would have had a lot of connection to family. This is where family genealogical records would have been stored as well. During World War II, the US government incarcerated everyone of Japanese descent on the West Coast in internment camps, forcing hundreds of families to abandon their homes, their farms, and their possessions. which in this case included this Butsudan. The family left the Butsudan in the care of the White River Buddhist Temple when they were incarcerated. Unfortunately, anti-Japanese and anti-Asian violence was high during the war. Pioneer Cemetery was vandalized, abandoned Japanese homes were looted, and after the war, there was a significant white supremacist movement to prevent the return of Japanese families back to Auburn, where they had lived for decades. This was called the Remember Pearl Harbor League. This is a headline from a 1944 newspaper. And they got a lot of print in the newspaper because the editor really supported them. And unfortunately, that editor went on to become a Washington State Senator and a mayor of Auburn. So those views were widely accepted at the time. This time period was also the same time, sort of the 30s through the 50s, it's mid 20th century, where redlining was at its height in the area. Redlining is the practice of using zoning laws and banking systems to prevent people of color from either owning homes or land in certain cities or neighborhoods within a city. This ad that you can see for homes around Lake Holm advertises that it is a restricted district, which you can read there in the middle of the text. And that specifically means that no people of color were allowed to live there or purchase homes there, except if they were live-in domestic servants. We actually wrote an entire article about redlining in this area, which you can find on our website if you want to learn more. Later in the 20th century, we had subsequent waves of immigration. In the 40s and 50s, we had Filipino and Korean immigrants. This image on your screen is of the group that would go on to become the Filipino American Hall in Algona, which you may be familiar with. This was 1942 that they were having this particular celebration. In the 60s and 70s, we saw a lot of Latino and Chicano immigration to our area. In the 80s, it was Ukrainian and other former Soviet nations that a lot of folks immigrated from. And in the 90s, we started to see Marshallese, Micronesian, and Somali immigration to our area. This is a display of some Marshallese handicrafts that were recently donated to the museum by the local Marshallese community. If you're interested in more history, of course, there is always more. This is just a brief look at some of the history of immigration and racial relations in our area. You can visit us at our website at WRV Museum, and I really encourage you to check out both our online collections catalog and our virtual exhibits, especially our Black in the Valley exhibit, which talks about the history of Black folks in Auburn and Kent. And that's it for the history. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, there's so much to learn, and I guess I had a few questions, and I see some questions in the chat, which is great. Some comments and responses that are happening. So I encourage, if you have a question or a comment, please use the chat. I think one thing that strikes me is that you focused on what happened after the internment, what happened during these gaps in time periods where a lot of things happened that were very dangerous, lethal to Indigenous people, Black people, Japanese people. And I say that because sometimes I think people just get bullet points in history. They think, okay, we know the Japanese were interned, but once the war was over, everything was great. Or we know that Black people were slaves, but once they were freed, everything was fine. So it's so important to fill in those gaps of knowledge. And I'm just wondering if people have questions about what you're doing over there. Are there programs? Are there activities? Can they call and ask questions? Can they also maybe give you suggestions on exhibits or other things to add to what you already have of the history of Auburn?
Yes, absolutely. We are always doing public programs. A lot of them have been online lately, of course, because of the pandemic. So I really encourage folks to check out our programs listing that is on our website, where they can find out how to sign up for those. If you have ideas about exhibits or articles or anything that you would like to see, or even just questions for your own personal research, please send them to me, send them to our director, Rachel McAllister. We are always eager to hear from the public, especially if you have ideas that you're passionate about. And if you have a research question, I'm the person who takes care of all those at the museum. My job is taking care of the artifacts and doing research, and especially taking care of our stories. That is my job. So if you have a story that needs to be preserved, go ahead and email me, and my contact information is right on our website.
Well, and those stories are so important because I think, again, just to reiterate, I think sometimes people think, well, when laws are changed, that everything's great. Laws don't change the way people think. It just changes the way they behave. But changing the hearts and minds when it comes to racism and that kind of thing takes time. And a law, just simply enacting a law isn't going to change that. I did have a question for you personally. Why do you think it's so important for us to learn about history, and related to the present time? Because I was one of those students when I was in high school. It's like, why do I have to take history? That happened 200 years ago. What's the big deal? Why do I care about that? Why is it so important to know what actually happened?
I mean, it's vital to know what happened, because otherwise, I don't think you can make sense of what is happening today. It's a matter of truth and justice and all these very highfalutin sounding virtues, but it really is about the truth and knowing what happened, because that impacts people now, that impacts their parents, that impacts the choices their parents made, and their grandparents and their great-grandparents. Even something as small as why Auburn Way looks the way it is. It's all curvy while the other roads are a grid because it used to be a river. A river used to run through there. And that river impacted why people settled places, why City Hall was built where it is, why certain people decided to immigrate here, why the soil is. All these things come from this little tiny fact. And that is even more true when we're talking about racial equity and the sometimes very difficult histories of relationships between individual people. And it is vital that we preserve and we share those stories so that we know where everyone is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. And again, if people have suggestions to augment and complement and add to what you already have, they can contact you. That's great, because this is an ongoing kind of a living document almost of history that you can keep adding to and embellishing. And that's all for the benefit of everyone. So thank you for the presentation. We're going to go over to Dr. Linda Perales and Patricia Davis from DeMarsh Consulting. And they have been doing some great work at the City of Auburn, which I want you to inform us about. And also just answer that question, why should government be given the role of dealing with these race and social justice issues? The floor is yours. Who wants to go first? Looks like Patricia's getting the signal.
Oh, am I going first? Okay.
You're going first. Dr. Perales says you're going first.
Well, we're a pretty good tag team. So thank you for having us. And we are so excited about doing this continual work with the City of Auburn. One of the things about DeMarsh is Linda's got 30 years of work in government, and I've been with her for the last 5 years doing this diversity, equity, and inclusion work and making workplaces better places to be. But I've known Linda for about 30 years. And one of the things about DeMarsh that really drew me is the fact that we don't just do training. We want to make sure that the skills that we're imparting on our clients are hardwired so that you're implementing as you're learning. And that is just really, really critical for me, especially in this work. And Kevin, as you said, the disparities have always been there. And the unfortunate death of George Floyd only helped to highlight and surface those disparities, forcing us to take a deeper look. And again, with that history, we've got to know where we are to know where we're going. And, and then we're hit with COVID on top of the George Floyd incident. And that highlighted even more disparities, especially in our schools. And nothing is going to happen without disruption and awareness and intentional change. And there is discomfort in that change. So I'm just going to say one quick brief statement about government, and I'm going to hand it over to Linda. City government is the altitude where change can be made to dismantle systems and structures that are embedded in the way the city does business, and how it can look at these disparities that are impacting the residents, especially those residents of color or those who are otherwise marginalized. And I hate that word marginalized, but until I find a better word, I'm going to use it. So, for example, we've got hiring. And when removing those biases and implementing equitable hiring practices and promotional practices to better reflect the people that we actually serve in our cities. So I'm going to take a breather and I'm going to let Linda fill in a little bit.
Okay. You're kind of, I think your audio is down, Dr. Corrales.
Volume here.
There you go, that's better.
I'm also delighted to be here and delighted to be doing this work with the City of Auburn. As Patricia said, I've had years and years and years of work with city and county and state municipalities and have redesigned and redone a number of departments and agencies, from community development to public works to utilities, to regulatory agencies and legal departments, finance departments. And in every one of those, we design our programs and design our services and design our processes and hire our people in the most convenient ways possible. And I've sat in more frog ponds than you can imagine. And for me, the frog pond is, yeah, but we can't, yeah, but we can't do that. And yeah, but we don't have the money. And yeah, but there's a reason all of these processes do these things. So the yeah, but refrain, I tell people, is a statement of a problem. Every yeah, but is where we start in fixing why our processes and our systems and our policies and our procedures don't serve the most marginalized. There's a reason why we don't have streetlights all over the city. There's a reason why we don't have sidewalks everywhere. There's a reason why some school districts are poorer than others. All those yeah buts tell us the problem. So we design systems that are systemically racist, systemically biased, because we don't have a solution. And there's no excuse anymore for us not to fix those systemic biases, those systemic problems. We just really don't have good excuses. They're fixable. So that's what our work will be in any government we work with, confronting those reasons. So the comprehensive plan isn't designed to serve everybody, because everybody doesn't show up with a clear voice. And there's a reason they don't. There's a reason they're not heard. There's a reason our capital programs don't touch everybody. So we have to get at these root causes. And I'm proud to say that governments everywhere are doing a whole lot better, but there's a whole lot to do still. Our efforts with the City of Auburn, as Brenda so eloquently told you, really are about bringing an equity toolkit to those same decision models that the city's already doing, bringing new filters, bringing new measurement tools, bringing new awareness, helping people confront those yeah but excuses, helping them apply new tools, and conducting some skills building. We don't really like to call it training, because the excuse with training is I can plant my butt in a chair for 30, 40 minutes and then go away and not do anything different. Mm-hmm. So what DeMarsha has always been about is real clear implementation, making sure that change gets made, that things really happen. So I really hope that who's ever out there listening to us on Facebook asks some good questions, and that the communities of interest begin to notice the work that we're doing, and really engage with us, because one of the things we want to happen is make sure that the service delivery professionals at the City of Auburn begin to shift the way they deliver services and the way they work with their communities in the city going forward.
That's great.
Patricia, anything else?
Patricia, your turn. Back to you. You're muted.
I just want to applaud the leadership team at the City of Auburn for jumping into the deep end of the ocean with critical race theory. I think that's a good place for the leadership team to have jumped in. We will be working with all of those directors in partnership so that we can keep the conversations open about the learning that's going to be happening over this next year so that it's part of the DNA of the city workers. And we look at it in this way as a concentric circle. It starts with leadership, it starts to work its way out, and then into the community, to the residents. So I think we have a really good approach, and I'm just so appreciative that Brenda is in her position. She's a great partner, and we believe in partnership more than anything.
And I would add that they've been very brave. These are big steps, as you mentioned, Kevin. Big steps, very brave, and we're right there to support, to help, to take the blame, be Brenda's shoulder, whatever we need.
Well, I think it takes a certain amount of courage to be willing to open yourself up for what some people is a foreign territory to speak. You know, it's maybe something, if you live, and it's nobody's fault, but if you lived a life, you know, a privilege, or you've just lived a life where you haven't been aware of or had to deal with or had to address issues, it can be a little bit unnerving to all of a sudden be confronted with, oh my goodness, you know, the reality I thought existed really doesn't. But what is this new reality? So I think it's so important that people are willing to take that step and be willing to be vulnerable, to look inward. I know as a trainer myself, a lot of times a client would call and say, tell us what to do. And I'd say, well, we'll get to what you should do, but you got to understand why you're doing it. It's not it's not just translating things into different languages and changing your website and coming up with a great mission statement. It's about being anti-racist and proactive. And, you know, there's other words that are getting thrown out there, co-conspirator. And I mean, it's a very involved in the long haul, for the long run kind of thing that you have to get yourself into. So we'll get back to you a little bit more as we still have plenty of time to talk about these things. I wanted to, by the way, we have 3 other speakers, and after we touch on each topic from each speaker, we will go back into a more general conversation about these issues, and all the while, of course, addressing some of the questions and comments in the chat. But I wanted to move over to Isaiah Johnson, ASD Director of Equity for the Auburn School District, and find out what is going on over there in the school district. You're on.
Yeah, right. Hey, thank you, Kevin, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to talk about the work and the efforts that are taking place throughout our city and even the Auburn School District. I will say this, I'm going to put it out there. We have work to do in our district. We do. I'm not going to sit here and tell you everything's great. We recognize that we have a lot of work to do. And so COVID, I love what everybody has said. COVID has exposed a lot of the disparities, the inequities. And so it's telling us it's time to change. It's time to change how we do education. So for us in the Auburn School District, the question is, how do we reimagine our schools' experiences for our students? How do we reimagine our school experiences for our families? Because we have to do something different. And I love what you said, Patricia, and even Dr. Perales, you said this. You said this system was designed for a particular group of people to be successful. And we know that there's a lot of families and communities of color that are not successful based on the system and how education was formed and created. And so we must first acknowledge that. I got to be real. We have to acknowledge that the system wasn't designed for a lot of our families of color and a lot of our students of color to be successful. And so we have to know that we have to do something different. And this is our opportunity to do that. So we started with really defining what does equity mean to us in the Auburn School District. And so I think you got to, like you said, Kevin, you got to have clear, you got to have a why, right? You got to have a clear definition, a clear why as to what equity means. So we came up with our district equity statement over the summer. And this is what our district equity statement is all about. It says this, it says equity is each student having an educational experience in which they are seen and valued for who they are now, while developing their full social and academic potential to prepare them for the future they choose. Now, again, what I love about that is that we're not as an institution saying, here's what you need to do. It's up to the student. It's up to the student. And sometimes in education, we can say, you know, college and career, I get it, yes, but not every kid, that may not be their avenue. And so, but it's our job to make sure as a school system, we are giving them an experience where they are seen and valued, where they don't have to shed off anything who they are, and they can be their authentic cultural self in the classroom. So our work right now is really about how do we create educational experience with our students, and really our students, and I love, Patricia, I don't like the word marginalized either. I always say our students who are further from educational justice, our families who are further from educational justice. How do we create experiences where they are seen and valued for who they are now? Because if they are seen and valued for who they are now, that means we are welcoming them. That means they belong. That means they matter. That means they have a place in the system to help us come up with solutions. And so really our work is really around defining what that educational experience looks like. What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And part of our work with that is our 7 principles of culturally responsive practices. And I'll just list these real quick because I think it's important that you know these. So the first principle is this: students are affirmed in their cultural identities. I love that because nobody should have to shed off who they are. We want our kids to come to us the way they are. They shouldn't have to be different. They shouldn't have to, they shouldn't have to assimilate into something that they're not. They should be their authentic cultural self. So that's the first principle. The second principle is teachers are personally invited. And I want to even add this. It's not just teachers are personally inviting, but our office staff needs to be personally invited too. Our families, when they come to the office, need to know that they're welcome, that they belong, that they matter, and that they're seen and valued for who they are. The third principle is learning environments are physically and culturally invited. In other words, they can see themselves in our school. They see, I know a lot of schools have flags of different cultures within their school. Some even have posters of different ethnicities and races, that reflect the demographics of their school and their students. The fourth principle is students are reinforced for academic development. So if they're seen, valued for who they are, guess what? Now I can get to the academic piece and make sure that they are supported in their way, that they don't have to, again, shed who they are to fit into a classroom, but they can be academically developed in the way they come, in the way and what they bring to the classroom. The fifth one is instructional changes are made to accommodate different types of learners. And we know that a lot of our families and students who are further from educational justice learn in a different way. They learn in groups, they learn. And so utilizing those different types of strategies to keep our students engaged and allowing them to be part of academic conversations. I go to some classrooms, I'm going to be honest with you, and you don't see kids of color talking. Why is that? And we need to really, what I'm saying? We really need to analyze that and really ask ourselves, why is that kid not talking? Is there something in that classroom that's a barrier for that kid not to talk in the classroom? The sixth one is classroom is managed with firm, consistent, and loving control. In other words, I'm not going to apologize for white norms should not be the norms that define how our students behave. And that's what's going on in a lot of our schools. We have white norms and white rules, and then our students are asked to assimilate instead of be their cultural selves. And that shouldn't happen. And so we need to create community agreements where every student has a say in what the classroom environment looks like and how they learn and what support they need. So how do we create these community agreements where students have a say and there's shared power with the teacher and how that community thrives? And then the last one is interaction, stress, collectivity, which I talked about a little bit earlier, as well as individuality. We know that there has to be some individuality, right? But I think for a lot of our families and students who are further from educational justice, collectivity is really important. Community is important. Community is important. And how do we create these spaces, classrooms and schools where community is valued and celebrated, even though it may be different from other cultures? And so that's the work we're doing right now. And I will say this, we also are working on student voice. We want student voice to help us lead in some of these changes. And we're also in the process of putting together a parent voice piece as well. And so that's kind of our focus for right now. We really see this as an opportunity, Kevin, to change the system. And we want our families, we want our students to walk alongside of us as we make some of these changes, because we know the system didn't work before COVID. And so why are we going to try to implement it again? Let's change the system so that can work for everybody as we move forward in this pandemic. So I have a lot more I want to share, but I don't want to take up all the time. So,
well, in the general part of the discussion in a little while, we can kind of circle back, and I'm sure you'll be able to insert some additional information. One question I had was, you mentioned families and parents, and I was thinking, in addition to the work that you're doing and the teachers are involved and the students, what can parents do? Do you have advice for parents? I mean, in some cases, maybe there's parents already involved, but then there might be new parents that are new to the school district and they're going, hey, what's going on? I don't know what all this equity stuff is, but I want to be supportive and I want to understand it. Do you have advice for them, or are you able to accommodate people coming to certain schools and talking with you or talking with other people involved in this work?
Well, I'll say this, we're in the process of putting together what we call community cafes. And we're gonna look at doing these community cafes at certain schools. And so I can't go into all the details right now because we're setting all this up right now. And our hope is that parents would come to these cafes and be real with us, be transparent with us. We can't change the system if you don't tell us what's going on. And we're really targeting those families who are further from educational, I don't want to say marginalized, but who are further from educational justice. Those are the families we really want to hear from as we look to change this system.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank people for putting questions in the chat. I'm going to monitor them, and I know that some of them might be directed at Isaiah, and we'll come back to that as soon as I kind of put it all together and so that I can deliver the questions to you in an efficient way, because they are kind of piling up, which is a good thing. But I did want to segue into our next speaker. And, you know, you're talking about community, and part of our community here in Auburn is law enforcement. And the relationship between law enforcement and the community is something that's just about always in the news in one way or another. So I'm really eager to hear from Commander Christian Adams about DEI and policing and Auburn. There's a committee that's been formed. I want to hear more about that. So is Commander Adams with us?
Yes, I am.
All right. Okay, you're on.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I think this is a great town hall that we're having, a lot of great conversations happening. First of all, yes, we have myself and Ms. Goodson Moore have been working together to help bring diversity, equity, and inclusion to the Auburn Police Department. The diversity portion will come. We're out there looking for diverse candidates. We're revamping our hiring processes and the ways that we evaluate our candidates to make sure everyone's, all the barriers that have been there in the past for people to get hired are not there. We have diversified our oral boards. That's our interview process. I sit in on probably 95% of those, and I select the diverse background of officers to also sit in and evaluate candidates. Since I have numbers here, since 2019, we had a 10% diverse department, including all of our staff, about 150. Now in 2021, we're at 23%, and we're continuing to build on that number. We don't go out and just handle applications to people, so we do need people to come and apply. We get a lot of criticism for the things that we do in our policies and procedures. And instead of the criticism, fill out an application, learn something about your police department. We have our police advisory committee, and that's an amazing group with 2 of the members of the PAC on this town hall today. And so we are definitely focusing on increasing diversity. We are definitely working on being more inclusive. We are definitely working on being more equitable, not only inside of our building, but outside of the building in the community that we serve. So we are always open for feedback. We are always open to continue to get better. We know we are not perfect. And I know we're going to get chastised for things that we do that some people don't understand or don't agree with. But we are definitely open to feedback. We are definitely open to improving. And that's something that we are aiming for every day in this department.
Well, I had a question about the feedback, because sometimes I think, especially if people are internet savvy, I guess is the word, they're able to look on the website and look and say, oh, here's the phone number I should call, or here's the person I should email. What are the best ways to say I'm a citizen in Auburn? There's something I'm confused about, I'm upset about. What's the best approach to get the feedback to the proper person, would you say?
One of the best ways is to call our non-emergency line and get to our front office. If it's after business hours, we have an online complaint process, and you can put in that form that, I don't have a complaint per se, but I do have a question. And so since you asked that question, and it obviously has been an issue in the past, I will work with our IT to make sure we could get a feedback button added to our webpage. So I will, great ideas come from people in the community all the time. So that's a great idea. And that's something that we definitely can address. Pastor Lambert, who's on here, when he and I first met before we started the PAC, one of the concerns were that you could not make a complaint against an officer or staff member. It took several steps on the website, and it was very, very, very difficult. Well, before Pastor Lambert left my office, we had that removed and put on the front of our website. And we revamped our entire complaint process so you can do it all online. But I will definitely work on making it possible that people can ask questions on our website and we can get back to them.
Okay. Another thing I was thinking about are policies. I had worked at the City of Bellevue for a long time, and I worked a lot with the police department there in community forums and things like that, where we bring in people from the community and they could sit down with an officer for a couple of hours and just learn about policies and things. Sometimes I think people can not know that officers are following a policy, as opposed to, oh, that officer did something and it was his own discretion that he took upon himself to go and do this to me or pull me or whatever. But is there a place where people can review the policies and just kind of learn about how officers are following what policies that will then, influence how they might, interact with the public, for instance?
No, I love that idea. I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure. I don't look at our city website very often unless there's an issue. I'm a police officer. I respond to problems. And so that's another thing I will work on to make sure we get that on there. I'm pretty sure it's on there. But again, because I haven't seen it with my own eyes, I don't want to make the assumption that it is there. But we have had what we call Talk with a Cop with our former chief that he started, where we would go out for a couple hours in the community and answer questions from people. Okay. And then myself, I did what I just called them meet and greets, where we went to a couple of the apartment complexes in the city that would have us, and we did 4 meet and greets this summer. We also, on 2 of them, we partnered with Revived Church, where they provided entertainment, snacks, and toys for the kids. So we got a great turnout at those 4 events, answered a lot of questions, and really connected with a lot of people in the community.
If you have young people that might be considering a career in law enforcement, because I'm thinking that over the years I've heard about, well, it would help if the police force itself would be more diverse, especially if you have, maybe a predominantly white police force that's working with a very diverse, communities of color, that kind of thing. What would you tell like a young person of color, or just a young person in general, is thinking, hey, maybe I might want to pursue this? What kind of expectations would you want to, share with them about going into law enforcement, and how would you encourage them to do that?
Well, I'll tell them, due to COVID, which has caused a lot of disruption and everything, we had a Police Explorers program that was up and running, and we had anywhere between, I'd say 8 to up to 20 youth of Auburn that participated in that program. We have some, I want to say, 2 officers that were explorers in their youth that are now have been in the department for 15 plus years. We have a young man who was an explorer who's applying with us now and is currently in the background process, hoping that he gets hired. He's a very, very articulate and very educated young man. But for those in the community looking to get into police work, I say continue to live a good life, make good decisions, and be ethical in what you do. Make sure you treat people with respect. Make sure you have a great support system around you. Being a minority in this profession, sometimes we do want diversity in this profession, but sometimes we get a lot of name calling when we go to certain communities. It's getting better because we are doing a better job as officers of reaching out to the community, and we are doing a better job of having more understanding and building better relationships. So that is getting a lot better. But I would just encourage anyone who's looking to getting into this profession to just make sure you get your education, make sure you make good decisions in your life, because during the background investigation, we look into everything you did, and we look into your contacts, your past employment, your discipline record in school or at your current or former employer, your tardiness. I mean, just a lot of things. We look for people with a lot of integrity. You don't have to be perfect, because no one's perfect, right? But we want someone who's going to be honest, and someone that has learned from mistakes if they made any in their life, and someone that has a high level of self-accountability. We understand that no one is perfect, and we could work with someone who's going to put in the work, and someone who will have a high level of character.
Okay, well, thank you. And we'll come back with, I have some more questions when we get into the kind of general portion of the discussion. I wanted to move over to Pastor LaShawn Lambert. And,
yes, sir.
You are, give me the name of your church again. I saw Resurrection in there somewhere.
Yes, Resurrection Church, Auburn, 123 L Street. We've been here going for about 3 years. We're a very diverse congregation, which started our journey in meeting with our mayor and the police chief, which I believe is a good relationship. I'd consider the former chief to be a friend, and the current chief to be someone I'm looking forward to getting to know, and the mayor to be a person that has great potential to bring about change in our city. And I believe what we're going to be talking about is community involvement with law enforcement. After George Floyd happened, and I saw our city's response to the BLM rally, I knew that we had a problem. The victimized were perceived as the threat. The issue was not racism, police brutality, whatever violence against people of color and women we were seeing by law enforcement. The issue was the response of the people. That was scary. Racism in law enforcement was not the problem. The problem was people being mad about it, which reminded me a lot of how my grandfather spoke of post-World War II America, where the issue was not integration. The issue was that Black people had the audacity to speak up and say, we want equality. That was a challenge. And in our city, I refuse to believe that we would keep the same mindset that my grandfather, great-grandfather, and father had to face in what I believe to be a great country. So after meeting, I believe Commander Adams spoke, we had a sit down where the chief said, talk to Commander Adams. which I'll get back to in a moment, because apparently the heavy lifting on our relief from the oppression of other systems is on our back, and finding an advocate means they'll let us talk, but we'll still have to do the work to help our own battle. The Civil War was not a slave revolt. It was when our brothers and sisters said, we will not tolerate it. But that's I guess, a talk for a different day. But we have to get, instead of there being the Black people are mad, the white people are mad, our Asian brothers and sisters are mad, we formed the PAC, where you had people of diverse perspectives, life experiences, cultures in one room where we could talk and express to the chief and to the police department what we saw. When Commander Adams, I, and the chief sat down, we found people that we strongly disagreed with their conclusions on our city, but we wanted there to be legitimate representation so the people I could in good conscience tell my fellow citizens that your voice is being heard, even if it's not my perspective, because the agenda was making sure that everybody felt safe in Auburn, whether you wore a police uniform and a bulletproof vest, or you're scared to death of that officer who had sworn to serve and protect. And what I found is that there are issues that we would like to change, and the issues that we would like to change are issues kind of like the fuzz on your sweatshirt. We want to shave that, but we don't want to deal with the big hole in said sweatshirt that must be sewed up for us to all to stay warm. The big issues where we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that is an inconvenient challenge right now when it comes to placement. When I heard Sister Brenda, and I'm a churchy guy, so if I'm calling everybody brothers and sisters, because we're all family tonight. But when she spoke of what we had signed on to do, and then I think about the hiring processes that I've seen, or the appointments of late as it dealt with law enforcement, we are not being true to that because it's inconvenient right now. So our challenge now is to move beyond the we are the world, promise keeper, let's hug and take some pictures, and move into, if we're going to do the work of inclusion, let's make sure that even when it's inconvenient, we have search committees and we have a hiring process that's transparent, so that when you look at, I'm looking at the Facebook screen to my left, and it says that there are 9 people signed on there. So apparently I know more, well, not apparently, I know way more than 9 Muckleshoot members that would have certain innate fears of law enforcement, but they're thinking that our talk is just talk. We need to see some measurable change, and no more conferences inside of buildings that the people who are affected have no idea what the outcomes were, what the agenda was, and how it's going to impact them. I would have to commend our mayor and our former chief, and I'm sure that our current chief, Mark Collier, would do great work, but they did a wonderful job of hearing hard things. Because I was told by someone that there was no racism in the Northwest, but they were willing to hear my story and my experiences, and for us to share and then become an advocate, because we had a real relationship. I love task forces because they sound real good, but at the end of the day, I need to make sure that my 4 Black sons are safe, and so are their white friends, their Asian friends, their immigrant friends, their Latinx friends. And I'm believing that the PAC is a wonderful step in that direction. But as we look at this panel, the people who have been tasked to do the heavy lifting are also the people that have to bear the burden of the challenge that we're trying to alleviate. Now, I'm all about perspectives, but if we're going to make the real change, it's going to have to be a lot of people that use different hair care products than we use, stepping up and saying that the Auburn that we want is one that really is inclusive, even if that means that the path that I walked that was easier becomes more like the path that everybody else had to walk to get to the same place. As we talk about that frog pond and Dr. Perales, I love that, because I've heard so many yeah buts. My prayer as we talk about diversity is that we move from letting attorneys and insurance companies determine policies that will keep our city safe. And in our last PAC meeting, we heard too many times that the answer for why our people cannot be kept safe is because of some attorney's recommendation or some insurance firm. Now, as just my daddy was a forklift driver, his daddy was a blacksmith, and on the other side, we have farmers and teachers. If we're going to say that we are safe and trust the law, then I need to know that the law is going to protect me and the people that I love. If we're not going to say that, we're setting ourselves up for challenges that, again, we would begin to persecute the persecuted because we've created a climate of fear. My prayer is that our current Chief Collier and the mayor and the city council say, we're going to keep our people safe, even if it's not the popular thing. Well, LaShawn, that could risk lawsuits. When it comes to my children, I'm okay with the city being sued to keep them safe and let our officers do their job, which is to protect and to serve. And I believe that'll lead to the greater equality that Isaiah was talking about, because some of the barriers that our students of color feel just going to school would be relieved if they could have a sense of safety in the presence of law enforcement and their teachers. If the policies make sure that everyone is safe, then we at least have a fair shot instead of feeling that you're fighting to learn and having to fight the system. I fought that fight, and I'm assuming you've had a number of encounters where you had to work twice as hard to get half the respect. So you just did the math and became, as W.B. Du Bois would have called us, the talented 10th. And because we succeeded, our brothers were punished. Well, if LaShawn can succeed, if Kevin can succeed, if Isaiah can succeed.
If Oprah can succeed.
Yes, everybody can. And that's kind of like saying because Tom Brady can, every white boy can be a super quarterback. That's an unfair standard. And so I would like to get us to a place where, whether it's law enforcement or education, everybody's on equal footing, which is going to require the good old boys network is going to have to die, even at times when it's stressful. I'm believing that when these things happen, when they change, we'll have a lot of one-term people on city council and in key leadership positions, because there will be pushback, but there's always pushback to real change.
Well, I have a question. This has been great. I feel like I went to church and I missed last Sunday, so I'm glad I ran into you here.
We have a seat for you.
Okay, all right. Well, one thing I'm thinking about as you're talking, because you mentioned policies and you mentioned laws, and they definitely are important. But it made me go back to thinking about hearts and minds. You know, sometimes when I've gotten into debates with people about health disparities or systemic racism, and they kind of roll out, well, the data says this and the data says that, and I said, well, the data doesn't tell the whole story. And, as I said earlier in this forum, I said, a lot of times you can enact policies and laws and people will try and follow them, but that doesn't mean they believe in them. And it doesn't mean that they won't break them if they can get away with it. I'm not talking about specifically law enforcement necessarily.
I understand.
But how do you get people to start seeing the reality that maybe a young Black male feels, or a young Black male of color or woman of color, when a police car pulls up behind them, or when they're in a certain situation, or when they go to a small town in Montana and they don't see a Black person for 3 days? I mean, how do you get people to start having that kind of empathetic response to that?
Well, the empathy side is we're going to have real relationships, which a lot of that goes back to what my sister up front talked about with redlining in the Valley. There are certain areas of our town where you do not see Black people. And a good portion of the decisions in our town are made by the people that live in those neighborhoods. So you have people who are making decisions based on people groups that they have zero interaction with. Mm-hmm. That has to change. We need to have, I think you talked earlier, and I know Isaiah did, about having more cafe chats mm-hmm. where it's not at an election time, where those who might stay in ivory towers have to talk to the people that live in what I call the alphabets in Auburn to mm-hmm. see what it's like to live where the police show up a lot, but they're told the police can't do very much. Versus in the more expensive neighborhoods, there's quite a bit more follow through perceived. But we're going to have to get people together in a room, mm-hmm. having real conversations if they're allowed to make decisions. So like our mayor has done a wonderful job, in my opinion, of saying, hey, we need to talk about this. I might need perspective, not just on racial issues, but in any area where I perceive she's felt I might need more information, she went and found it. I would like to see that become a universal truth and it not just be on Sister Brenda to police these things, but as a culture, whether you're the police chief or whoever else. Where we set up policies where if your mindset is not about making Auburn feel safe for everyone, you are no longer a candidate for that position. If we're going to say diversity is a big deal, you cannot be Bull Connor and be in Auburn and be comfortable. Right. It's like, oh, well, how do you bring up Bull Connor? Bull Connor felt he was right and he was supported by those around him because he had been around. Seniority in an organization not known for justice does not make you a qualified individual. It makes you part of the problem. I would like for our city to say, we will stand up, and if these issues, and I don't mean an execution in the streets, because that's not popular and that costs money. But as training goes on, where you will spend more than half an hour in a diversity training if you say something bad in an email, where there is some real justice doled out to make sure that certain mindsets will not be tolerated. There's certain crimes that our society has decided we don't want to happen, so the punishment is severe. Apparently, passive racism is something that we can tolerate or we like, so we don't punish it, and so we keep it around. If we wanted it to go away, it would.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of gaslighting going on with that, and it just, I promised I wasn't going to bring up the John Gruden situation, but you mentioned emails and things like that.
Yes, sir.
You know, and the thing about it was that, you know, John Gruden, who resigned as the Las Vegas Raiders coach for
yes, sir.
time, he just about insulted just about everybody he could in a series of emails. But the thing that struck me too was he felt comfortable enough to write that in an email to another owner of a National Football League team. So yes, you mentioned that comfort zone of like, there's, you know, people may smile and again follow the rules, but that doesn't mean that they aren't living in a time warp. And for them, it might as well be the late 50s or the early 60s. But I do want to ask you the role
yes,
the role of the church. You talked about bringing people together, which I totally agree. I think people have to come together, and that's where the understanding and the compassion and the empathy on both sides really starts to happen. Even on Zoom calls, there's a lot of Zoom groups where I've met a lot.
Oh, yes, sir.
Because of COVID. But is there a role that you see your church playing or other churches playing in facilitating some of this?
Well, when the church stops tolerating racism in Jesus' name, I think we'll see progress. I've had people quit my church because I brought up Juneteenth being a good thing, because it made them very uncomfortable at a church to hear someone say that slavery was bad because I must hate my country. This is for real. This is what we deal with. But they can go to a church not far from mine where they will hear that America never did anything wrong, and it was just a result of the times. My prayer, whether it be in the Christian traditions or the evangelical side of that, or my Catholic brothers, my LDS brothers and sisters, or whichever people group, we have a good relationship, I believe, with our brothers and sisters down at the Buddhist temple. But we're going to have to say, as communities of faith, that we will not tolerate racism and confuse Christianity and white nationalism. We made that mistake before, and it cost us the Civil War. So the churches, when we want something to change, we're going to have to stand up and say that racism is sin. And I can make a great case. I taught in Bible colleges for a long time, that racism is sin. And my Muslim brothers and sisters will tell you that racism is sin where there's no place to run, and for us to cry loud and spare not. And if we will stop pandering to politicians and become the prophets of our age and speak the truth of God, because certain things are consistent. Whether you believe in Jesus or you believe in a book of philosophy, these are consistent principles that hurt our society when we allow people to be marginalized, or as Isaiah said, pushed further away from justice. If we, and as a Christian, I'll just speak for my group, if we would just adhere to the book and treat everyone with honor, respect, love, and push for righteousness and justice, many of the things that we're talking about could not have been seeded into law enforcement or officials believing that the American way was the best way, even when it was oppressive to our parents or to me. The way that it's always been done must have been the way that God wanted because of predestination. That's not even what that word means in the Greek. If we will take time to step away from our pet sin of racism, our national blight, which is racism and oppression, and say, we messed up, and whatever we have to do to bring restitution, we will do. Law enforcement, education, job opportunities, women's suffrage would not be a fight that we're still fighting. The women's suffrage movement did not just end with the vote. Now we have many women don't vote because they don't believe it matters, because they've been pushed further from justice. But in the book, going into Acts chapter 2, we're told that there is no more male, there is no more female. All of the different people groups disappeared in the church. So for a Christian to have a racist or a sexist stance violates our truth. And just like our city, if we're going to say these are our governing principles, whether it's the church or the mayor's office, we have to line up with that and be consistent and allow ourselves to be held accountable to the inconsistencies and the compromises we're making.
All right, well, thank you. And we'll come back to that. Thank you very much. Amen. I did have a Zoom question, and I'm going to start paying more attention now that we're in the general discussion here. But one Zoom question was for Commander Adams. This is for you. Hope you're still there. I see your name. Are all new and existing officers receiving training and continuing education in mental health and behavioral issues as opposed to criminal behaviors? I know that's kind of a hot topic right now about the use of the training for officers when it comes to people having a mental health crisis, and then also the use of, I guess, social workers or counselors. Maybe you could just talk about what's going on at Auburn in relation to that.
Yes, so there is a statewide mandate. You have to do 8 hours of mental health counseling or crisis intervention training. Here at Auburn, we do 40 hours, even though the requirement's only 8. We do a yearly 2-hour refresher. We have defensive tactics training. We have 6 of those sessions a year. And at all those sessions, we also touch on de-escalation and crisis intervention and mental health counseling, or dealing with mental health people. We have mock scenes at the end of the year where we have a whole scene dedicated to that, where the officer has to work on their verbal skills to talk to the person who is acting as if they're having a mental health crisis. When it comes to mental health professionals and those things, with the new legislative update, we are required to call them to see if they'll come to a scene. Well, unfortunately, when those laws were passed, the mental health professional community wasn't on board and did not know. And so recently at a training we had, I had a wonderful opportunity to speak to one of the directors. And unfortunately, when we have someone who is suffering mental health crisis and we call the mobile crisis team or other behavioral health specialists, they will not come out to the scene because it's not a safe scene. We have a subject who was unrestrained and is, their actions are unknown. And so the mental health professional or social worker will not come out because there are a lot of threats and unknowns for them to take on just to come out and help us. And so unfortunately, the cart was kind of put before the horse on this one. And we don't have all those things in place that we would like to have when it comes to these things. But the City of Auburn is diligent on working on mental health counseling and using other resources when possible to help de-escalate situations and have a safe resolution.
What suggestions would you give to residents if I'm sure everybody on this panel, as well as in the audience, has seen situations where maybe they're not quite sure. Is this person having a mental health crisis? Is he just a violent person? Is it a combination of the two? Do you encourage people, I guess, what type of behavior would you, if somebody saw a certain type of behavior, what would then dictate them calling 911, I guess? Because sometimes some people react too slowly and sometimes people might overreact.
No, and I agree 100%. And that's, it's just like someone who owns a dog and they say their dog doesn't bite. You don't know what the dog's thinking. I don't know what a person's thinking. And so unfortunately, it's up to the individual when they see something they think might be suspicious or something that might be criminal in nature, if they are able to call remain calm and articulate clearly what they are seeing, that gives our dispatch center and our officers more information about what we are going into. A lot of times people just give vague descriptions, and that's not as helpful. And I do understand that the person calling might be experiencing something for the first time, where in police work, we experience it on a daily. And so we are unfortunately desensitized to it because it is our norm. But for the citizen that this is the first time they're seeing something like this, we do hope they call from a safe area, and that we could get the person who's in need resources that they need.
Okay. And if they can always call your non-emergency number. Sometimes if something's kind of questionable, like, well, more of a general inquiry. Sometimes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I want another question that came up, and I'm not quite sure if it was addressed, but it was really directed at our consultants, Dr. Perales and Patricia Davis, and their connection outside of the city of Auburn with community residents or community groups. Is there a connection that's going on now that's part of your plan and your program?
I'm gonna just get a qualifier for that. Is that connection with the City of Auburn community groups?
Well, I'm reading a question. And hey, Brenda, you could jump in and clarify.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, part of diversity, equity, and inclusion here at the City of Auburn, of course, a major component of that is community engagement and inviting the community in to participate in this with us. So there are several things that are going to be coming up. We want to have focus groups with the community. We want to invite people to apply to be part of our external advisory group. And so the answer is yes, the consultants will be available and will be working with the community in conjunction, in partnership with me and other people here at the city. But if I put my information in the chat, if people want to connect with me, I can see what types of, conversations or meetings that they might be interested in having outside of that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing was, sorry, go ahead.
We definitely agree or ascribe to a 360 approach. We think that is going to give the city a better view of what they need. For example, our work with the Department of Natural Resources, we interviewed and talked with all of their partners, including their indigenous partners, and really got that nice 360 view of how they were being perceived.
Well, I would really encourage people to, I don't know if it's via Zoom or, I would encourage community members to participate in things like focus groups and things, because I've sat in on some online listening sessions with law enforcement and with different other cities in the area. And it was great to see a lot of allies there and a lot of kind of community representatives. But what was lacking were a certain segment of the population that was not there, that was directly affected by what we were talking about. So maybe you could even just to maybe, sometimes you say focus group, that sounds a little intimidating. Maybe you could even describe what is a focus group? What does that involve?
Well, I would add real quickly, one thing that characterizes a focus group is the word focus, meaning that you keep your approach very focused. It's what's working, what's not working, what might work.
The audio is going in and out, so could you repeat that last sentence? I'm sorry.
Sorry about what characterizes the focus group is the word focus. So you keep your questions on what's working, what's not working, what might work. So it's really the challenge for doing a good focus group is to keep things really focused, so that people aren't overwhelmed and you don't lose control of where you really want to get input and feedback from people. So we would like to get a diverse group of people, or even groups of people from a common area, say a community, for example, and focus on what's working, what's not working, what could be better. So some of that comes to talking about service levels from the city and why there's not feedback, why there's not participation, why there's not services that meet their needs. So those are really important pieces of information that help the service providers, directors from different departments look at what's working and what's not within their organizations. So capturing that voice of the community is really, really helpful to putting that equity lens on the design of services.
Okay.
So, right, it's getting that voice.
Yeah, and I think that comes through intentional outreach, because if you put a call out there, they may not always come. So it is really going to take some intention to get the communities that you want to be in your focus groups involved.
Well, it reminds me of when a politician is campaigning. I mean, and I had this at Bellevue City Hall. Initially, when I got there, it was kind of like, well, we send out press releases, and they didn't send any of the press releases to any of the minority newspapers or anything. They just sent it to the Seattle Times, King and Cairo and Como. So they were already missing a chunk of the community right there. Then they said, well, come to City Hall, and we have a nice City Halls. I mean, I like City Hall. But I said, you've got to get out of City Hall and you've got to go to delicatessens, to churches. I mean, I had the mayor and I had some of the council members at cultural events dancing on stage with kids. I mean, I had them in bars at happy hour. I had them at synagogues. You have to go where the people are, because I think, for one thing, it shows a certain level of street cred, and in terms of this is serious. It, just like politicians, you see them pop up. I remember Arnold Schwarzenegger showed up at my church in LA in the middle of a sermon when he was running for governor of California, the Terminator, right there in the Christian church. I said, where did he come from? And he got up there and he started talking and he won, So I really would encourage the community to take advantage. I think city council meetings have, at Bellevue, we call them oral communications. I don't know if they call it that here, but do you know if there's any online groups that you happen to know of where people could just participate or join? I say that because I live in Shoreline. Oops, don't live in Auburn, but I live in Shoreline. And there are a couple of online groups that meet and they have activities, they discuss issues. Right now they're working with the city of Shoreline to over their use of force policies. And so they're very active. So I didn't know if you knew of any kind of online groups for people who couldn't get out.
I do. I mean, I am a member of the Pierce County Black Collective. Oh. I am a member of Tabor 100, and they cater to many people of color and groups of color. And that's a really great forum because they can get word out to even more groups.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah,
I appreciate talking about, churches and schools and bars and, places where people congregate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And meeting some of those key members in communities can really open the door to a much larger community of regular folk that you just don't talk to or don't show up to city council meetings. I remember when I was at the city of Bellevue, we were trying like the devil to get the Latin community to show up to things. We had posters, mailings, get 10 people. I had the good fortune to meet a Puerto Rican gentleman who had just moved to Bellevue. He says, look, you're doing it all wrong. You got a great program, but a lot of Hispanics and Latinos aren't going to go out on a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. They've worked all day. They work 2 jobs. They got to put the kids to bed. What you need to do is have events after Mass on Sunday. I'm like, what, Sunday afternoon? I followed his advice. We had 300 people at the next event with his help as well, because he was a member of a couple of different Catholic churches, and he told the pastors, and people were walking in the door saying, my pastor told me to come. If I had told them to come, they wouldn't come. So I think there's a lot of out of the box type of thinking that has to happen. Yep. So I know we have a little bit more time left. I'm just looking at see if there's any more questions. I did want to go back to Isaiah for a minute. Isaiah, you there?
Yep,
Oh.
I am here.
Yeah, I was just, when you were talking about the students of color, but really all youth are the future leaders of, well, there are future leaders. At some point, we're going to have to totally hand the reins over to them. So I guess what I'm trying to get as best you can describe is what are some of the challenges on a more, I guess, personal level? You kind of touched on it with especially students of color are facing. I mean, because we're living and we got this kind of big cloud of COVID hanging over everybody's head. You've got, you're out of school, you're in school wearing a mask. There's a certain amount of social unrest going on. Could you add to just give us some insight about some of the challenges so we can be as a community more empathetic and more supportive of youth?
Yeah, I think the main thing I hear from students is they're not able to be their authentic cultural self. And so we're experiencing a lot of a rise on multicultural clubs in our schools where the students can express themselves and be around people who look like them, talk like them, and sound like them. And where it's not judged, where it's not told you can't act that way. And so we have to create spaces for our students to just be their cultural self. We're also within that, we've had some of our schools look at their school policies. One policy being the dress code. For example, some schools didn't allow hats or didn't allow headbands, didn't allow do-rags. But now a school has made a change. They said, you know what, those things weren't necessarily a barrier or a hindrance to the learning. So now kids are able to express themselves and wear a do-rag. And girls are able to wear headscarves, especially African-American females. There's some days you don't feel like doing your hair, and it takes a long time. I'm just being real. It takes a long time for some of our Black females to do their hair. And so sometimes it's just nice to put on a headscarf and kind of fix it up and make it look kind of nice, So looking at those, you know what I'm saying, those policies so our students can be themselves. And that's that work that we're doing right now, and it goes back to our district equity statement where students are seen and valued for who they are now. So what policies are interfering with them being seen and valued? And that's the work people are doing right now, really understanding there's some policies that were basically around whiteness and assimilation, and not valuing the cultural assets of the various other cultures that other cultures bring to our schools. And so that's a main piece. And then I would say this, I think students also want to see themselves in our history. Our history does not reflect the true narrative. Let's just be honest about that. And I'll just say it. Our history is whitewashed. And we have to do a better job of presenting history to all of our students that has different perspectives, has different narratives, racial narratives, and some various groups. And so I will tell you this, that I'm proud of the work that we're doing in Auburn School District around this work. We have our 7th grade Washington State history teachers interrogating the text that was given to them to teach, and now supplementing that text with other articles that have different perspectives from our Native Americans, from our Black, from our Asian. And so we're really trying to balance, give students a more balanced and a more real, authentic perspective when it comes to that history. We're also doing it the same thing. We're interrogating the text of our 8th grade U.S. history. And we're actually going through it and supplementing materials in there that have real authentic history so our students can see themselves and express themselves. What do we always hear about as Black and African? We hear about slavery, right? We don't hear about the joy of the work that African Americans have done. And that was one thing that students expressed. They said they want to hear more about the celebrations and the joy that we contributed to American history and American society as well. So that's some of the pieces we're working on. I can tell you that, I can be honest with you, COVID has brought a lot of different challenges. And I think someone alluded to it earlier, the trauma, all of the experiences that our students saw over that year and a half with George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, just all of those experiences being seen has brought trauma to a lot of our students. And so we are seeing students, coming back in person who are kind of acting out. And so we have to actually look at ourselves and say, what resources do we need outside of our schools to help our students of color? And then I got to be real with you on this. We need resources where the people who are working with our students look like our students. Because then they can connect and relate. And so those are the things that we're working on as well. And so I hope I answered your question. I can go on. I can go on and on.
Oh, I know. We have to have a whole, you guys got to have your own town hall just by yourself. And I wanted to go over to Hillary for a second, but first I just wanted to add something to what you said about going through history and really scouring it and finding out what was left out or what was just distorted. Because I think of even the Tulsa race massacre, which is what it was for so many years called the Tulsa race riot, which seems to imply that they were like these kind of equally opposing sides kind of who got into, a kind of lethal warfare when it was anything but that. It was a massacre, and it wiped out a financial district that was flourishing at the time. And then there's also a map that you can find online of all the race massacres that happened, along with the massacres of indigenous tribes. And it looks like a dartboard, just the whole country of all the times that, hundreds of people of color were wiped out for really no reason. And I had a question for that the mayor might be able to address. But first I wanted to see if Hillary, did you want to add something to what Isaiah said? Because I saw your screen pop up.
I just wanted to clap. I completely agree about everything you were saying and our absolute need to fix historical narratives that have been completely distorted. Certainly even from when I was in school, there's things that I didn't learn until I was a full adult working in the museum world, trying to seek it out myself. And that is unacceptable. It needs to be the real truth. We need to use the real words, the right words to describe what has happened historically. And that is true for the tragedies and for the joys, as Isaiah was saying. And it all needs to be in there.
Yeah. Thank you, Hillary. Go ahead.
Can I add one more thing, Kevin? I would say that, we have ethnic studies in our high schools, but it's not a requirement. And I think I'm gonna be honest with you, that class needs to be a requirement to graduate from high school.
I think there's
I can tell you,
I was going to say, I thought there was a state that actually, was it California?
California just passed that ethnic studies will be a requirement. And so we in a way, we make, we create these classes, right? But they don't, as Pastor Lambert was saying, but they don't put it at the forefront. In other words, it's just okay. That's just a supplement class, but an ethnic studies class should be a graduation requirement, because that class is going to prepare all students, whether you're white, Black, Asian, whatever color you are, to have a perspective of history, so that when they go into the real world, they have that knowledge, they're prepared, they have an understanding of what really happened. So I'm gonna work hard to actually see what we can do to make ethnic studies a graduation requirement. I'm pursuing that.
Add to that.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you, Isaiah. Now, I saw Mayor Backus popped up there. Perfect timing, because I have a YouTube question. Is there a way to create a position within the police department that's a hybrid of mental health worker / police officer?
All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. I'm really excited actually to answer that question, because I have put a position in the upcoming budget amendment. It's not within the police department, but it is for a social worker type person, mental health professional, who will work with Kent Hay, who some of you have met on our town hall meetings before, working with individuals who are experiencing homelessness in our community, but also to be an asset for our police department, to be that bridge when we're not getting the designated crisis responders, the DCRs that Commander Christian Adams was talking about earlier, to come to a behavioral health or mental health crisis. This person would be able to come out and assist with the police in that de-escalation and getting them to the services that they so desperately need.
Okay, well, these are some things that I think that our residents can follow up on. And Isaiah, I mean, I would love to, we'll talk about that whole, I don't know what you would call it, campaign to make ethnic studies a requirement. What can, along those same lines, and anybody can jump in on this, I think I keep going back to kids. What can, anyone can answer this. How do you, and there's so much controversy and debate about, you know, critical race theory and what should be taught and what's being wiped out, what's being whitewashed and all this other stuff. What can parents of all colors tell their kids about history and about what's happening in the world around them? Because I was witness to an incident, and this happened right after George Floyd was murdered. And this is somebody kind of in my immediate circle of people that I know. And it was a white mother who her 10-year-old, I guess, turned on the TV, and there was some protests going on, and which kind of, in some cases during this coverage, there was some examples of, you know, looting or whatever was going on. And the girl very innocently said to her mom, "Hey, what is this? What's going on?" And the mom, white mom, immediately said, "Let me change the channel," you know, and it was like this awkwardness of, and I know this person very well, so it's not like I felt there was any, you know, nefarious intention behind it, but it was that paralyzed look of like, I don't know what to tell her about this. But if you don't tell your 10-year-old something as a parent, somebody else is going to tell them, and that might not be a good idea either, especially as excited and as upset as some parents get when certain things are being taught in the school and they're down at the school board meeting. So, but when it comes to BLM and what's happening in our nation, it's like, we'll turn the TV off and put on Nick at Night or something. Any suggestions on how parents can start, without traumatizing their kids, but make them aware what's going on? Patricia.
I think that a parent's silence is deadly. And I grew up with a German mother who came over from Germany post-war, a Black father, and they never talked to me about anything. Dr. King's assassination, I'm watching television at, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old, and my mother's crying, and I was like, I don't know why. I'm asking her why she's not talking to me. And that silence kept me silent and didn't allow me to be brave. So I think that, how do you tell kids to persist? I think if we're going to be able to share anything with our parents, and Isaiah's in probably the best position to do that, it's like, have a conversation with these parents so that they know how to have conversations with their children. They're our first educators, and their silence will speak volumes to their kids. Because I'm so upset with my mother these days for not talking to me about any of what they went through. I had to learn it on my own.
Well, I got the same thing. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I remember I was a little boy, and they had the Watts riots, 1965, I think it was. And they didn't tell me what was going on either. I picked up the paper, and it's like, I could tell even at 6 years old, this is something as bad as happening. and then living in LA, which was very, let's just say, informally segregated. We lived in an integrated neighborhood, but there was definitely neighborhoods you didn't travel in, especially after dark, even in LA in the 60s and 70s. But when I was watching what was going on with the civil rights movement on TV with the hoses and the German shepherds and the buses, freedom riders being assaulted, I thought I was watching a movie. They didn't tell me what that was about either. So I guess this all kind of dovetails into just one of the favorite topics of discussion in training a lot is having those difficult conversations, having those courageous conversations. So before we end tonight, I'm just trying to give people some advice or direction on how to start having those conversations. Because as you say, silence is deadly. So any other thoughts from the panelists?
Kevin?
Yep.
I would encourage parents to do that work ahead of time and to get informed themselves. Many parents would not know how to address it because it's so far away from their experience. They don't know what to say. I left the denomination I grew up in because it was all Black. And I didn't want my children in an environment where everybody was one race and then they went to school or work and we had diversity. So we're going to have to make difficult decisions for the sake of our children. If a school district has a poor English program, you move and you find one. If your circle of friends is all one race, one perspective, one political ideology, expand that, not saying you agree with it, but at least understand it. So when your children ask you about it, you can tutor them in diversity, in critical race theory, or whatever the issue is, the same way that you would have to go have a touch-up class in geometry to help them with their homework. If we're going to say as a society that we're going to love and value everybody's perspectives and experiences, we as parents have to go do that work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Be proactive, preventative medicine, so to speak. Go ahead, Isaiah.
I would add to that, I mean, part of the work has to be people going on their own personal journey. And I'll be honest with you, and Pastor Lambert, I appreciate what you shared. Many white folks are relying on us as people of color to do the journey work for them. Mm-hmm. And if I'm honest with you, and I'm not trying to be mean, I'm just being honest right now. If you want to know more about it, then you have to go on the journey for yourself. And you have to ask yourself questions like, when did race matter to you? You have to kind of do your own racial autobiography as a white person and go through, like, what did your upbringing, how many Black friends or friends of color did you have? And really analyze all that. Because if you can analyze all that, then it'll tell you a little bit why you have the perspective you have. Mm-hmm. And then from there, you have to go into learning about other different cultures and being able to be uncomfortable. And I'm going to be honest, I think that's hard for a lot of white people. But for Black people and people of color, we're uncomfortable all the time. Because I can guarantee you, when we go to different spaces and different things, we're probably the few in that room. And so in a way, it makes us uncomfortable. And so for my white people out there, it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to experience discomfort, because guess what? You're going to grow from the discomfort. You're going to learn about yourself more from that discomfort, and you're going to come to an understanding of who you are. Because if you don't know who you are in this journey, then it's going to be hard to have a conversation with your child. You have to know who you are. You have to know your why. And that's why it's important that you have to go on the journey for yourself. And I love what Pastor Lambert was saying. You have to go on the journey for yourself, because then you can develop your why. And when you develop your why, then you can articulate that to your child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. I had a question for Commander Adams, just because I think we're kind of getting to the point. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brenda. Are we kind of in the wrap-up zone right now, or where am I?
We've got about 10 more minutes.
Okay, good. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I wanted kind of closing statements, closing thoughts, things to that the audience can turn off the Zoom or whatever and go, okay, there's something to think about, or there's something I can now do that I didn't know before, because I think that this type of conversation is just the beginning of what hopefully is an ongoing dialogue and continuous ongoing conversations, just like you talk to your kids. You don't talk to your kids once, go, oh, that took care of that for the next 10 years. That conversation will cover me for several years. It's not like that. It's always evolving, and there's things always happening in our society that will all of a sudden put the spotlight on something that we didn't know was necessarily there. I think that's what happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and just all the things that happened in the last couple of years. But I'll start with closing statements with Commander Adams. And one thing I guess I want to ask you as an officer is that maybe just give us some personal insight into your, I guess, how you think of yourself and the role that you play in the community. Because I think that officers, I've had good interactions, I've had great interactions, I've had really bad interactions over the years. I treat officers as individuals, However, some people, and I've heard people tell their kids this, all the police are bad. Don't trust the police. So I'm just hoping that you can just give some personal insight about who you are, Commander Adams, and what role you play in the society, because you're here tonight and obviously this is important to you. So.
Yes, it is. It's difficult. You hear all the time when you see something like George Floyd or another incident happen, you always say, where are the good cops at? Where are the good cops at that I always hear about? We're here. We just don't make the headlines. We do the good things. We do the right things. We don't make the headlines. That doesn't sell tickets. That doesn't get clicks. Pastor Lambert and I working together on the police advisory committee got all kinds of pushback and hate and all this stuff. But it's like other people had an opportunity to do the same thing, but criticize the work that was done. And so when the good cops or those in this profession that are really trying to make a difference step up, we don't do it for the fanfare. We don't do it for the headlines. We don't do it for the pats on the back. We do it because we care. And we're going to continue to do it because we care. This profession will chew you up and spit you out. It is a thankless job at times. It is, it's taxing on your health, your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health. It tests you in many ways. But we at Auburn Police Department, we are committed to getting better. We are committed to working with the community. When Pastor Lambert and I first met, one of the things he said that got me was he doesn't want the police department to be just Auburn PD and the community to be the community. He wants us all to be the community, to all be a part of one another. And that's something that I was like, we have to work together. Our police advisory committee just celebrated its 1-year anniversary, and it was amazing. And talking about difficult conversations and things, we've had a bunch of difficult conversations, and we are constantly striving to get better. So if people in the community are willing to have a conversation and work with us and talk with us, give feedback, but also let us have a say. We're not going to try to explain, try to justify things we did. We'll explain policy, procedure, law. And sometimes the outcome is not what that person wants, but sometimes that's what our tools are available due to the law. So we are committed in Auburn to work with you. We have a new chief and he's just as dedicated. I know the process wasn't as, some people had hoped, but in these trying times with COVID and vaccines and unrest and officers leaving the state left and right, we needed consistency at this time. And we got consistency with our chief. And, we in Auburn are happy. We're not going to be like other agencies and just be losing people left and right, because that's what happens. The good ones leave, right? They go somewhere else because they have opportunities, because they're going to just shine and be exemplary employees. And so I just want to say my closing arguments. We here at the Auburn Police Department, we are willing to talk and have conversations. We're willing to put in the effort if you meet us halfway. You might not always get when your car gets stolen, we just can't find it in 10 seconds. Sometimes it takes time. Cars hide in garages. People take off license plates. Things happen. We can't always give you your desired outcome because the law doesn't allow it. But if you take a breath and just give us a second, we could get there. We could work through it. And if you're not happy with the outcome, or if the officer doesn't live up to your expectations because they are rude or the delivery is wrong, then we have outlets and avenues for that to be investigated. So we could look into that behavior, correct that behavior, and prevent an officer from becoming a bad one. We want good ones here. We have an amazing community. Everyone who's on this panel and everyone who's listening, we appreciate your time. I appreciate your time. I'm Commander Adams, cadams@auburnlaw.gov. You can email me. I will email you back.
All right, thank you, Commander Adams. Let me go over to Hillary, closing statement.
I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, and especially for everyone's wonderful words. I was excited to learn about some of the work going on in other departments here. And for folks who are interested in learning more history, I already plugged our website. I would really, really encourage you all to check out the University of Washington Labor History and Civil Rights Project. They are an amazing project. They did a lot of groundwork on redlining around the Puget Sound area, on the Chicano movement, on early Black organizing in the Seattle area, on all sorts of things surrounding civil rights for all different groups. And if you're interested in getting some of that education so you can have those good conversations with your kids, that is a wonderful place to start.
Thank you. Closing statement for Patricia Davis. You're up next.
Thank you. I think what I would like people to do is to pay attention to their biases. Understand why when you walked past a person who's different than you had a reaction, or you had a feeling, or you had a thought, and ask yourself that question, why? That person hasn't done anything to you yet, and hopefully never will. But ask yourself why. So pay attention. Yeah. I think
all right. Thank you. Important. Thank you. Dr. Perales.
Unmuted. There we go.
There you go.
Okay. Get that audio thing off there. I would just say, just from the from the interviews that we've done so far with some of the staff, I would say that one of our challenges so far is going to be one of our challenges so far with the staff is going to be operationalizing some of the terms we've used tonight, such as the work. So for some of us, we've come to understand what the work is, but some of our other audiences don't understand the work. The work being defined as recognizing that all of us have unconscious biases. All of us have blind spots that we don't even know what we don't even know. We had one person that we were interviewing say, well, just tell me what to do and tell me when this project's over. I remember thinking, it'll be over when you die. Because that's what the work is. It's a lifetime journey. And we continue to say that this is a really long journey once you understand, quote, what the work is. Then there's another term that has to be operationalized for a lot of people that are our peers and our coworkers and so forth, and that's systemic racism, white privilege. Those two terms cause a lot of our coworkers to flinch and run backwards, and so for some of them it starts the work. So those are a couple of things that we have to recognize, that a lot of our folks are at different starting points, and those are part of the fears that parents face when they're struggling to figure out how to talk to their kids, that these terms aren't operationalized everywhere. And that's one of our starting points with training and with the work with a lot of staff and community members who will go, we're hearing these things and they sound really, really scary. So the work can't start till they know what the work is. And the work can't start when some of our terminology is really frightening. And people want to go back to the way things used to be, whatever that was, and begin to recognize that what used to be isn't so great. Thanks.
Thank you. Closing statement from Isaiah.
Dr. Perez took the words out of my mouth. This is not the time, everyone, to go back to the way things were. And this is not the time to go backwards. This is time to really come together as community. What I look at when I think about equity work and diversity and inclusion work, it's about bringing communities together. And we're all coming together to problem solve how to shape the future for the ones that are following us. And right now, our students, our youth, they're wanting a different outcome. And it's up to us right now to create a different outcome when it comes to our education, when it comes to how we do things in the city of Auburn. They want a different outcome, and they want an outcome where they're seen and valued for who they are and where they can thrive and not just survive. We know that some of our communities are just surviving, and that has to stop. It's time that all communities thrive, and thrive. So let's bring them all together and figure out ways we can make that happen.
Thank you very much. Now I will move, or almost finish, I will move over to the pastor, and then we'll finish up with the mayor and Brenda, actually. So Pastor Lambert, final statement.
As we are coming together and asking people to be part of our community, I'd encourage everyone to find somebody that looks or you thinks different than you and ask them, now, what are you afraid of? And listen to it. I believe that'll help us understand the problem. But as far as a parting shot, I believe our city will take as long to change in these areas as we, the leadership, and we, the loving community, allow it to take. If we tell ourselves it's going to take a long time, it's going to take a long time. If we start setting up mandates and believe that change is possible, change will be possible. We got to the moon because we said we're going to do it by a certain time. As long as we allow racial equity, or actually all equity and inclusion, to be an issue where it's a long-term thing, it'll take forever. We must remove this from the academic world and go back to Dr. King's statement of why we can't wait. To me, my 4 sons demand that we move quickly, or they will be in just as much danger as the previous generations of their family. And I will not tolerate that as a father and as a community member. So I ask all of my brothers and sisters out there to actually do what you can do to help bring us together for the sake of all of us being safe and growing together.
Thank you very much. Well, let's finish up with some words, parting statements from Mayor Nancy Backus.
Thank you, Kevin. I think one of the hardest things to do is follow all of these brilliant people and try and find something new to add to their closing sentiments. And that's going to be really challenging because I agree with everything that they have said. This is a journey. This is not a one and done. The town hall is not the end of our work. It's the beginning of our work. It's going to be challenging. There are going to be some people in our community who just do not believe that we should be moving in this direction. I will say to them, again, what are you afraid of? You are not going to lose anything by allowing everyone to be a part of our community. I truly believe that through equity and inclusion comes diversity. So it's inclusionary hiring that we're going to be doing. It's inclusionary. It's asking for those opinions that are different than our own. Joking earlier saying it's Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask a question that might seem silly or quite frankly, might even offend someone that you're talking to. We all have to provide grace to allow the growth to happen. As Isaiah was saying, we all have to do our own journey. We can't rely on someone of color to do that work for us. But I will also ask for the grace that if I am asking a question during my own journey of learning, that people are willing to help me identify and understand where I need to be focusing for our community. I love our community, everyone in it. If you live in Auburn, regardless of whether you live in the most glamorous and glorious of houses or the stars are your ceiling at night, you're a part of this community, and we want you to be a vibrant member of our community. And the work is just beginning. Come along with us.
Thank you. Well, Brenda, you get the last word, Brenda.
First of all, I just want to say I'm just sitting here amazed at the conversation that we had this evening. I just want to thank every single one of you. I've worked with all of you in some capacity or another, and all of you brought so much great information to the table tonight and had some really open, honest, raw conversations. And I'm just proud of everybody in this chat room. And I also want to just reach out to the community and just really invite them to come. You know, I put my information in the chat, and I'd like to just kind of leave everyone with this quote that really resonates with me. And it's, if you find yourself at the table discussing the needs of a particular group of people, but you look around the room and you don't see anyone from that group, you should be highly skeptical of any conclusions that are reached. And I think that's profoundly important. And, you know, really, when we're doing this work, we have to keep in mind there should be nothing, no decisions should be made about us without us. And so I really am hoping that the community will come to the table and work with the City of Auburn. There's a lot of people here at the city who are very committed to this work. They're very supportive of this work. And I'm just so happy to have the opportunity to work with them and to work with other people in the community, such as Isaiah Johnson, Pastor Lambert. Hillary is absolutely amazing. I could spend hours with Hillary. She's taught me so much about my history as a Black woman, you know, things that I didn't even know because those things were kept from me and from my education. So, and I just want to thank the mayor for the opportunity to allow us to have this conversation tonight. And what I mean by allow is supporting our desire to just have an open conversation. And we have a lot of work to do, and I look forward to working with everyone. And thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
I appreciate your assistance. Yeah.
Well, everybody have a good night. It's been an honor. It's been fun. I've learned a lot, and I look forward to seeing everybody on my screen at some future date, staying in touch. And just take care and just keep up the good fight. Good night.
Good night.